Turn, if you would, to the book of Hebrews in the 2nd chapter, and we'll start at verse 11 today and endeavor to complete this chapter. As you find the book of Hebrews in the 2nd chapter, let me remind you that as we looked at chapter 1, we began to see that, first of all, that God had spoken twice. He spoke through the Old Testament, and then He spoke through His Son. And then the writer of the book of Hebrews began to tell us about the superiority of the Son. And we saw in those first 14 verses, we saw that His name is superior. His work is superior. He's superior in His nature, and His position is superior. When we started chapter 2, we saw that he broke from the idea of the superiority of Jesus for just a few verses, those first 4 verses, to give us an invitation/warning. And that warning is that since Jesus is so superior, you cannot let the opportunity to be saved slip by. Remember, He said to us that since Jesus is the superior one, you must give heed to Him, and you must not let your opportunity to be saved drift away. Just as if you brought a boat into the dock, you would need to securely tie it, lest that boat drift off and you be stranded without a boat. So you have an opportunity to be saved. You cannot let that opportunity drift past you. Just like the winds of waves of the lake or the ocean would take a boat or a ship and drift it back out to sea, so the winds of God's judgment would drift a person, blow a person straight into eternal hell unless they have been saved. And so His warning is, because of the superiority of Jesus, do not turn away from Him, but lay hold on salvation. You know, it's so easy to just do nothing, and to just drift away and drift past day after day after day after day, and just drift along in life until you die, and you die without Christ. And so He's saying, wake up, look at Jesus, and take advantage of the opportunity you have now to secure your salvation. Then we started in verse 5 again with the concept of the superiority of Jesus, and we saw He's superior to angels. He's even superior to redeemed man, even as great as redeemed man will be, and all the importance we saw hinted at there, that we will be able to rule under Jesus. Jesus is still greater. When we came to verse 9, which is the section we're in now, He is giving to us a list of things that secures Jesus' position as superior even to redeemed man. And we saw, first of all, that Jesus is superior because He is the substitute. He's better than us because He's our substitute. Without Jesus, we would have no substitute. The Bible tells us there is no forgiveness of sin without the shedding of the blood, and that blood had to be of a perfect substitute. Throughout the Old Testament, there were lambs and goats and doves and pigeons that were offered as substitutes. Now, each of those had to be perfect. And so Jesus was the perfect one who became our substitute. He became the perfect human being that He might offer Himself as a substitute for our sin. Secondly, we saw in the next few verses that Jesus was not just our substitute, but He's the captain of our salvation. And you remember that word that's translated captain there is the word for pioneer. It's the word that means He's out front blazing a trail. And so what He's saying is Jesus blazed the trail for our salvation. So if you want to be saved, then what you've got to do is follow the trail that Jesus made. You've got to follow the road that Jesus made, and you can be saved. Now this morning we started verse 11 with some new things about Jesus, and there are 3 more things in this passage that we find here that are just incredible things. And I want to be sure that I have time today to get to these 3. Let's look at verse 11. For both He that sanctifieth and they who are sanctified are all of one. For which cause He is not ashamed to call them brethren, saying, I will declare Thy name unto my brethren in the midst of the church. I will sing praise unto thee. Here, Jesus is superior to mankind because he is not only our substitute and the captain of our salvation, but he is our sanctifier. Verse 11 says that he is the sanctifier. Now that's a big word that kind of scares people sometimes, but it's not a complicated word. It just means holy. Jesus is the one that makes you holy. And if you're an honest person, it's difficult to think of yourself as being holy. But actually, your sanctification can be seen in two ways. There is the progressive sanctification of a person who gets saved, and there is the positional sanctification of a person who is saved. This verse is not talking about the progressive sanctification. Progressive sanctification is that when you got saved, you began to live for God and you began to change. And the longer you live for God, the stronger you ought to get in your ability to overcome sin and to live for the Lord. It's like that old saying, I'm not what I ought to be, but thank God I'm not what I used to be. All right? That's the concept of progressive sanctification. That's the process of that's the idea of progressive holiness. We're getting stronger. We're becoming. It's becoming easier to live for Jesus. Now it's never perfect. You're never going to be perfect in being able to do right. You're never going to be perfect in being able to overcome temptation. But progressive sanctification teaches us that it gets easier. And there are things that you used to be really weak to, you're not so weak to anymore. Because you're learning how to live for God. But that's not what this verse is talking about. This verse is not talking about the progressive sanctification. This verse is talking about your positional sanctification. Notice with me, look back at verse 11. For both he that sanctifieth and they who, what's that? Are sanctified. Not those who are becoming sanctified, but those who are sanctified. It's a present tense concept. It's a done deal. Here is the sanctification that God gave you the moment you got saved. The moment you got saved, God gave you a new nature. Now the problem is that new nature is still in the old flesh. And the flesh is still temptable. The flesh is still weak. And we struggle to live. And God is teaching us along the way to train the flesh to live for Him. That's the progressive sanctification. But here is the positional sanctification. The moment you got saved, God took you out of the family of Satan, put you in His family, and declared you righteous because of the righteous life that Jesus lived and the righteous sacrifice that Jesus made. God has positionally declared you to be righteous. And you have to struggle a little bit to get your mind around that because you know yourself. You know you're sinful. But positionally, God has sanctified you and made you holy the moment you got saved. And Jesus has accomplished that. Jesus is superior because of His ability to sanctify those. Hebrews 10, chapter 10 and verse 10, again talks about those who are sanctified. Again, in the 14th verse, he talks about the forever perfection that we have in Christ. So Jesus is able not only to help you along the way with your sanctification, but He was able to positionally declare you to be sanctified and holy the moment you got saved. It's like this. Those of you who've had earthly children, they've disappointed you at some point in time in life. They've disobeyed you at some point in time in life. But they're still your children, right? You still love them. And that's the difference between the progressive sanctification and the positional sanctification. Along the way in life, you're going to disappoint your Father. You're going to disappoint God. You're going to sin. You're going to fail Him. You're going to disobey Him. But positionally, you're still His son. You're still His daughter. You're still His child. And so here Jesus is saying, here the Bible says, Jesus sanctified you. You are sanctified. You are positionally in the family of God, and you are positionally made holy. If we have time to look at all that, we would see that that is declared to us because of the things that Jesus did. Now, this sanctification is so complete that Jesus is willing to call you a brother. Now, that doesn't leave you ladies out. The Bible is written from a male perspective, somewhat to save time. Can you imagine carrying a Bible around that would be big enough to hold all the he's and she's and thems, and if you did it that way, I mean, the thing would be you'd have to have a wheelbarrow to roll it in here. And so God has just written the Bible from the male perspective, but it doesn't leave you ladies out. He's talking about Jesus is willing to call you brother or sister, in that your sanctification is so complete that Jesus is willing to call you his family, his brother or his sister. That's how complete your sanctification is. Romans 8:17 says, not only are we positionally in a way that Jesus would call us brother, but Romans chapter 8 says we are even heirs, fellow heirs, equal heirs with Christ. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being an equal heir with Jesus? That's how sanctified you are. That's your position in Christ. And it's already a done deal to the point that he would call you his brother. And you are now an equal heir with him in the family of God and the things of God. I was thinking on this and I thought, what a blessing, what a privilege. But usually with privilege comes responsibility. What then would be my responsibility, since it is my privilege to be the brother of Jesus? What would be my responsibility to go along with the privilege of being sanctified in the family of God? Well, I would think there would be at least two things, and I'm not going to preach on these or teach on these this morning. I just want to mention them to you. First of all, my responsibility would be to act like I'm a brother to Jesus. To act like I'm a sister to Jesus. I mean, if you're his sister, if you're his brother, then you ought to act like it. If I'm the child of God, then I ought to act like I'm God's child. If I've been sanctified positionally in the family of God, I need to act like I'm there. I need to be conscious of, I need to be mindful of the fact that I am positionally in the family of God and Jesus is my brother. Second of all, I would think it would be my responsibility not to be ashamed of the family. Paul said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. And if I'm in the family of God and I've been saved through the gospel, then I shouldn't be ashamed of it. It ought to be an easy thing for me to say whose family I'm in. Quite often people ask me who my daddy was. And who was your daddy? Well, I'm quick to tell them. My daddy was Dean Sims. Now, my daddy was one of those kind of characters, you either really liked him or you didn't like him. And sometimes people find out Dean Sims is my daddy, that's about as far as they want to talk to me. And sometimes they want to tell me some story about it. Quite often they want to tell me about something he gave them, something he did for them. Sometimes they went hunting with him. Well, listen, it ought to be the same way when it comes to the family of God. If God has positionally made you a part of his family, and you are now the brother and sister of Jesus, you shouldn't be ashamed of that. And it ought to be just as easy for you to tell somebody who your spiritual father is as it was who your earthly father is. We ought to be just as willing to talk about our spiritual family as we would be our earthly family. Secondly, in verses 14 and 15, secondly for this morning, Jesus is superior because he has conquered Satan. Now these are great verses. Look at verse 14. For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver them who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. Man, this is a great thing Jesus has done for us. Not only is he our substitute, not only is he the captain of our salvation, and not only has he sanctified us, but he's conquered Satan for us. Amen. He's conquered Satan, and he's conquered the greatest tool Satan had, which is death. You see, if Satan can hold on to a man, if Satan can hold on to a woman until they die, he's got them forever. And Jesus has overcome that. Jesus has conquered that tool he's got because he's defeated death, and he's offered to us salvation by grace through faith in what he's done for us. We can be saved, and we can break the grip that Satan has on us. What a privilege, what a thing that Jesus has done. Look at verse 14. He says, For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood. All children, all humans is who he's talking about here. We're all partakers of flesh and blood. There's no, all the human race has got a common thing. We're all common in one thing. That's all. We're made out of flesh and blood. We all participate in that. We all share that. Now go down, let's continue reading. He also himself likewise took part of the same. Now those are two different Greek phrases. All human beings are partakers of flesh and blood. That means by nature we're all just alike. We all fellowship in that. But when it came to Jesus, he changed his phrase. And he said, Jesus is a partaker of the same. And the Greek concept there is he took on something that is not naturally his. Jesus reached out and took hold of flesh and blood. Jesus reached out and took on for himself flesh and blood, but it wasn't natural to him. You see, it's natural for you to have flesh and blood. That's the common thing. Every human being is born with flesh and blood. That's the common thing we share. Some of us are short, some of us are tall, some of us got dark eyes, some got blue eyes, some got hair, some don't. All that can be different, but there's one thing we all got alike, and that's the flesh and blood. But when Jesus wanted to be one of us, he wasn't a partaker of that. That didn't come natural for him. His nature is not flesh and blood. His nature is divinity. His nature is divine. But he reached out and took hold of flesh and blood. He reached out and laid hold on that and took to himself flesh and blood so that he could be like you. Only in a perfect way, that he might offer himself a sacrifice for our sin. Why did Jesus take on flesh and blood? Well, look back at these verses again, and he tells us. He says in verse 14, For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that. The word that is important in this passage. Now we've come to the purpose clause. What comes after the that tells you why Jesus reached out and took on flesh and blood. Jesus isn't by nature flesh and blood. He reached out and took hold of it and became flesh and blood. Why? That through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver them. Three things he says. First of all, he took on the flesh and blood so that he could die. Jesus couldn't die when he took on flesh and blood. He was divine. He was God. God doesn't die. Jesus could not die for your sin unless he reached out and took on your flesh and blood, unless he became like us, then he could die for us. And so Jesus had to reach out, take on human flesh and blood so he could die. Secondly, so he could destroy Satan. Through his death and his resurrection, he destroyed Satan's greatest tool, which is death. When Jesus died, he didn't die and stay in the grave, did he? Thank the Lord he didn't stay in the grave. He was resurrected from the grave. Why? So he could have victory over death, and he could pass that victory on to me and to you. And now we can have victory over the greatest tool that Satan has. If Satan can hold on to you till you die, he's got you for eternity. But not anymore. Not anymore. Because now there's victory over death through the sacrifice that Christ made for us when he died. And thirdly, he says in the beginning in verse 15 that he could deliver them who through the fear of death had been subject to it all their lifetime. You see, now the Bible can say, death, where's your victory? Death, where's your stand? You know, this morning, if you're lost, you've never been saved, you need to live every second you can live. Because when you die, it's eternal hell forever. It's hell for eternity. But if you're saved, death doesn't hold that same dread. Death doesn't hold that same faith. For a saved person, death is simply a step into heaven. It's the door through which you pass to get to be with God forever. It's the door through which you pass to get to all the blessings that God's been preparing for you. And so death no longer holds that fear. You've been delivered from the need to fear death. Because Jesus conquered death, and in conquering death, he sets you free from being afraid of death, because now being saved, being sanctified by Jesus means that you've got an eternal home in heaven, not hell. And death is the door through which you pass to get to those great blessings in heaven. That's why he's superior. He's superior because he has sanctified you and he has conquered Satan and death for you. Let me get to this final one just for as we close. And that is, Jesus is now able to help you in all kinds of trouble and temptation. Notice verse 17. Wherefore in all things it behooved him to be made like unto his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in all things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. For in that he himself hath suffered, being tempted, he is able to help them who are tempted. And Jesus is superior because he is able to help in the time of trouble. Listen, when Jesus took on flesh and blood, he took on all human experience. He was hungry, he was thirsty, he was fatigued, he was sleepy, he was loved, he was grieved, he was troubled, he loved, he had to exercise faith, he read the scriptures, he prayed, he was tempted to sin, he cried, he was abandoned, he was alone, he was lied about, he was physically hurt, he faced death and he died. You see, Jesus has experienced all the human life. And wherever you are in life, and whatever trouble you're facing in life, Jesus has been there. He's been there in the flesh, and he fully understands exactly what's going on with your life. In fact, Psalm 147 says his understanding is infinite. There's nothing that's going to take place in your life today or this week that Jesus does not understand. Because he's been there. He's lived through it. And he understands. And so he now is there for you to run to. That little word, I changed it because probably in your Bible, unless you're reading from the King James, it doesn't say suffer, it says help. That's a very interesting word. It literally means one who runs to the aid of a person who's crying out. One who runs to the aid of a person who's crying out. Jesus, because he took on the flesh and blood, Now He's able to run to your aid when you cry out. Man, isn't that a great concept? Many years ago, I was coming out of Moulton Baptist Church, and there was a little girl there, preteens, I guess. She was walking along with a handrail that goes down a brick wall. She was walking along, and instead of having her hand on it, she had her arm down between the rail and the bricks, sliding it along. And about the time I saw her, it got stuck. I guess the brick wall wasn't exactly just right, just the same distance from the rail, and her arm was stuck in those old rough bricks. I grabbed her and I said, don't jerk, because I was afraid she would tear her arm up. So I looked to one of the young boys there. I said, run to the kitchen and get us some Pam spray or some cooking oil or something, and we'll get her arm out. And so I was talking to her, trying to keep her from getting too excited, and I told him hurry because I didn't want her arm to swell. And so he had run to get to the kitchen. Well, everything was fine until the crowd began to gather around the little girl. And the people began to gather around her and look and talk, and she panicked. She was at church with her granddad. And she cried out, help, Granddad! Well, man, that crowd parted, and there was Granddad. And he grabbed that rail, that metal rail, and he put his foot on that brick wall, and he jerked back as hard as he could, and her arm popped right out of her. And he looked down at her, and he said, honey, if Granddad had to jerk that brick wall down. And when I think of this word succor, that Jesus is able to help us, He's able to succor us, that's what it is. When you cry out, He hears. But not only does He hear, did you notice in there it says He is able. He's able to do something about it. Not only does Jesus know what you're going through, but Jesus is able to help while you're going through it. And when you go to Him and cry out, help, not only does He understand, but He's able to help. If you call out for salvation, He's able to help. If you call out in time of temptation, He's able to help. If you call out when you're in need, He's able to help. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank You so much for this day, and we especially thank You for this portion of Your Word that tells us how superior You are, what glory You have, Lord. Help us to see that glory more and more and more, Sunday by Sunday, as we go through this book. In Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. Thanks for being here.